In this video, I'm going to go over the 15 criteria that separate out the good email marketers from the bad email marketers. And this is based on over 15 years of experience, both as a D2C owner, a CMO, a previous operator, and now a digital agency owner that's worked with over 150 D2C brands at this point, everywhere from 6, 7, 8 figures and 9-figure level of the business. So if you want to win business with these types of clients, this will give you an indication of what criteria they're looking to judge you on, especially from a strategic standpoint, in order to determine whether you're capable to manage the strategy and drive the business onto the next level. So let's get right into it. Number one, a good email marketer will always first work to holistically understand the business goals and KPIs of the e-commerce brand. An example of this might be marketing efficiency ratio, customer lifetime value, new versus returning customer revenue. And it's important to first understand these business goals and KPIs as opposed to diving straight into channel specific metrics and optimizing the account around this. For example, open rate, click rate, etc. Now, the reason this is very important is because your job is to serve the greater business goals, not to be siloed working in what is in your best interest and you think reflects most on your skills as an email marketer. A clear example of this would be just front-loading email revenue with a bunch of discount codes. It might work good in the short term, but at the long-term expense of a good, healthy lifetime value. So first work to optimize around business metrics and then look at how the channel-specific metrics can support those wider goals. Number two, a good email marketer first works to understand the tech stack and the limitations of the software of the business, whereas a bad email marketer will have ready-to-go solutions outside of the box and cognitive bias towards certain software. Now, this is a big problem because not every business is built specifically around Shopify and Klaviyo, and you need to understand the limits and constraints by which you operate in order to serve that business best. So you have to keep an open mind here. Not every tech stack is going to be the same across every single business, and it's your job to remove that cognitive bias and look at things objectively and use really informed decision making in determining what the best tech solution is for that business. Number three, a good email marketer will always analyze the sending infrastructure before a single email is sent, whereas a bad email marketer I've seen so many times will just dive into the ESP and blast a bunch of emails out to the list. Unless you have a strong sender reputation and good sending infrastructure, then your strategy doesn't really mean anything, because if you don't hit the intended recipient's inbox, your messages don't get read and you don't get any type of effectiveness or return on investment. So always first work to optimize the sending infrastructure before a single email is sent. Absolutely critical, but so many people overlook this step. Number four, a good email marketer creates an email and SMS automation strategy that suits the business holistically and takes into account their unique data set, whereas a bad email marketer will have an out-of-the-box flow setup that is applicable to every single business. Now, a clear example of this might be a customer win-back flow that's triggered after 90 days that you're using for a mattress business. If someone hasn't bought in 90 days and they're selling heavy-duty goods, mattresses, or furniture, and you're just pushing them into a win-back flow, then it can be very naive to think that every single consumer across fast-moving consumer goods to these other variable type of businesses will behave exactly the same. So look at the data, understand the nature of the business and the purchase cycles, and then devise an automation strategy around this, as opposed to having out-of-the-box solutions. And that applies to every area of the funnel. Look at the time to conversion in things like the welcome flow. Look at repurchase rates for post-purchase journeys. Optimize your strategy around this data and it will serve the business a lot better than a templated approach. Number 5 is something that I think is incredibly overlooked in the research phase of serving a D2C brand, and that is creating a messaging hierarchy for each stage of the customer journey. Now, a good email marketer will embark on things like review mining, where they're looking for information to create a structure within the communication of the brand in order to resonate and drive conversions from the customer. An example of this is looking at reasons why people didn't convert in an abandoned cart, looking at post-purchase surveys to see what customers are most looking forward to when they purchase the products. And then they're crafting contextual messaging around these areas. A bad email marketer will have a very generic approach to things like subject lines and email content and try and use the same behavioral psychology across every single brand. An example of this is, we miss you in a win back flow, you left something behind in an abandoned cart, welcome to the family in the welcome flow. We've all seen these too many times before, and it's not original, and at this point it really lacks effectiveness because the message is too generic and is saturated in the customer's mind. So do your review mining first, understand who you're trying to connect with, and then create the messaging hierarchy around this. Number 7, a good email marketer will always look at list growth through the lens of quality over quantity, and a bad email marketer goes the opposite way around. I've seen so many examples, and one that really springs to mind is a client about 2 years ago was insistent after partnering up with this big influencer on social media. They collected 8,000 email addresses, and they were adamant that these were high quality email addresses and they all needed to be sent campaigns and pushed through the welcome flow. I was very resistant to this. Eventually they insisted on pushing through with it, and it did affect the deliverability of the account. So always have in mind that not all is what it seems when it comes to list growth. You have to take this quality over quantity approach, and very, very importantly, understanding the source of where the leads come from and then breaking it down into cohorts, looking at the lifetime value, conversion, and the overall quality of engagement of these sources. If you do it in reverse, you're going to damage your long-term ROI because you'll affect the deliverability of the account. The next element is crafting zero-party data into the strategy, specifically around email flows. And this is very important due to this very well documented at this point consent-based era that we're entering, where we need this contextual information to craft a strategy around. And zero-party data is essentially information that's intentionally given to you from your customers that you're able to trigger automation of, do analysis into data, and that will help you start to analyze trends and then create an effective strategy to maximize revenue and profitability. A bad email marketer tends to just completely bypass this, and this goes back towards the generic templated approach before. Without this zero-party data, you're going to lack context and understanding as to who your customers are, what are they interested in, what's the time to conversion, when do they come back and buy again. Yes, you can get some of these insights from transactional behavior, but a real master of email marketing will be able to collect and then act upon zero-party data in a strategic way to propel the business forward. The next element is an interesting one, and it's around A/B testing. Now, I've seen so many accounts, in fact hundreds, where people get really frustrated with A/B testing and they're not able to move the needle in a statistically significant way. The reason being is one of two things: either they have overwhelmed themselves with too many tests and they're not able to track what moves the needle, or they're just testing the wrong things. An example of this is going right down the funnel into things like a win-back flow and really agonizing over a headline. Test high up the funnel where the conversions happen. Welcome flows, abandoned carts, your campaigns. This will make a measurable difference and be able to impact your strategy that will drive the business forward. If you're setting up too many tests and you're testing the wrong things, then you're going to be frustrated and you're going to work for nothing. So make sure you're testing the right things: sign up forms, welcome flows, abandoned carts. there's a lot of data coming in from the top of the funnel that can quickly make an impactful difference in the business. The next factor is discounting. Now, discounts do have a time and a place, but a good email marketer will understand business-wide metrics such as customer lifetime value and work to optimize the strategy around this. A bad email marketer will look at email attributed revenue in a vacuum and usually front load the strategy with a bunch of discount codes to boost this number up. Good for short-term email revenue, often bad for long-term business outcomes. The next factor is segmentation. Now, this might be a bit contentious and I've got into a few heated debates online around this. It's using intelligent segmentation that's realistic versus what I call hyper segmentation. Now, there has to be a balance between the two, and there's obviously different models like RFM, whatever. Let's just go right into the basics. Your goal with segmentation is the right message at the right time, right to the right customer. Sounds great in theory, but the reality is consumer behavior is very difficult to predict. For the majority of brands, if you don't have an extremely mature data set, then I actually recommend trying to reach the most amount of recipients with the broadest message possible. The reason being is if you maximize impressions, you maximize reach, then you give yourself the greatest opportunity to maximize conversions. And it's also important from a resource allocation perspective. If you're deploying hyper segmentation and creating all these very granular permutations, then that will significantly increase the amount of resources that you have to deploy to connect with these consumers. So unless you're an extremely mature brand with innumerable SKUs and very distinct customer personas, go broad the majority of the time. Don't confuse it too much and don't spend effort and too many resources on the wrong things that won't make a difference. Next element is the marketing calendar. Now, a good email marketer will first go back to the business-wide goals and they will create a strategy and a marketing calendar around supporting this. And it won't always necessarily be to promote email attributed revenue. An example of this is qualitative research, right? You're trying to find out why someone doesn't convert. You're trying to do research and development to launch a new product. This might actually lower the revenue per recipient in the account, but have a positive business outcome. You might want to promote a competition on social media, some type of content incentive. All these things are extremely valuable objectives, but they don't necessarily correlate to immediate revenue, but they're very supportive of the long-term business goals. Now, a bad email marketer will create this calendar solely based on the fact that they're siloed and they're trying to pat themselves on the back and look at email attributed revenue. It's very short-term thinking and it's not in line with what the brand ultimately might want and need for long-term success. So this factor really is about becoming as integrated as possible into the business to serve them well. The next element is a tricky one. Now, a good email marketer really understands the nuances behind seasonality, acquisition, unit economics. These can be quite complex topics, but ultimately it's what's needed to create the most impactful long-term strategy for the brand. A bad email marketer often lacks business fundamentals to understand these variables, and when things don't look so rosy, they will double down on creating offers at the expense of margin to really ramp up revenue for short-term performance. And again, I think this comes back to a lot of the points that we've already considered. Short-term hacks are often at the expense of long-term lifetime value, and while sometimes good for immediate cash flow, they can come back to haunt you down the long term and actually hurt the performance of the account. A good email marketer reports on things way beyond revenue. They look at zero-party data, they look at UGC, they look at creating content for the brands, they try to deploy qualitative research. They have all these other elements that I actually call a value framework that we run at Magnet Monster for our clients, and they report on these insights as well as profitable revenue. A bad email marketer thinks there's one objective from email marketing for D2C brands, and that's revenue. And this is a big mistake for reasons that we've already outlined. Businesses are very dynamic, they have multiple goals, and email is an incredible channel to support all of these goals. If you're solely thinking from the context of revenue, then you're missing opportunities everywhere in the account. We're getting towards the end, and the next factor is around email frequency. Now, a good, pragmatic, sensible email marketer works to strategically increase frequency by often doing holdout testing or just measuring the incremental uplift when they start to increase the frequency. And they do this from the view of looking at resource allocation in the business as well, in order to realistically examine the impact on profitability. A bad email marketer works in reverse, and again, it comes back to the fact that they're normally addicted to short-term revenue. So they start off with an extremely high frequency, and then they're working in reverse, and they're scattered and they're disorganized because they have to maintain this super high frequency. It's best to ramp up the frequency very gradually once you're sure the return is going to be there for your brand. And ultimately, the final point, I think it's quite clear at this point. Email marketing is about optimizing an e-commerce business holistically through the main business goals. And it goes back to the very first point we mentioned in the business. Unless you understand what the brand is really trying to achieve, what their goals are, what their pain points are, then you can't create a strategy to serve them best. Slow down, do the right onboarding, and work to support the long-term vision of the brand. Anytime you're promoting short-term revenue at the expense of long-term vision, then you're on a road to diminishing returns. And ultimately, while it might produce a short-term lift, in the long run, you're usually causing a lot of damage to the brand. So that's it. They're the 15 factors. I hope you found these helpful. If you liked the video, please subscribe, hit the like button, drop a comment below, and I will definitely get back to you. If you want to learn more about email marketing strategy, then sign up to our newsletter, marketingmonster.co.uk/newsletter, and I'll see you guys soon.